Hello everyone, my name is Shun-Yun Hu. I'm the co-founder of the startup company Immunology. And today I'm very pleased to be here. Although apologies for my absence from the actually being with you physically in the workshop. Due to some circumstance, I'm unable to come to the workshop, the conference, but I still appreciate very much the organizers for the invitation to giving this keynote. So the story starts almost, I think, 9 years ago when Gregor and I started to organize the first MMVE workshop. So the idea back then, I think both of us were doing research on peer-to-peer systems and its application on virtual worlds or online games. Okay, what's called the massively multiplayer online games, which many of you probably are familiar. So the idea was that could we actually have a workshop that's focused, devoted to this topic, so to build really large-scale virtual environments. I think back in 2008, which was the first year of MMVE, it took place in Reno, in the casino, okay, in Reno, Las Vegas. So I think we all went to play a bit of the slot machine or jackpot, but none of us really hit it. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here, right? We'd be the millionaires with going on vacations and not having to be researcher or doing research work here. So, so maybe that was the nice thing about not hitting the jackpot, that you'll be still working. And but okay, the workshop started, I think, with an interest because back then these MMOGs were started to appear. I think Warcraft launched in 2004, so that was 4 years after Warcraft launch and already a phenomenon. Also, Second Life also launched about 2003 and 2004. Yeah, so there were interests in exploring whether these worlds, these gaming worlds, can become bigger, okay, using new architectures or technologies. And this, although this hasn't really been happening yet, it's still my belief that this is something that's going to happen, where virtual environments, virtual worlds will become very large scale to not just the current size, but maybe millions, perhaps billions of people within the same environment. So this is a talk that's going to be talking about this assumption or this premise that virtual environments will at some point of time become really big, and what are its implications for us and for something for us to think about. Okay, so that's an overview. And first a bit, I think I have to introduce about myself. I've been, as I said, doing research on virtual worlds since 2003 when I was still a master's student. And since then, I actually went directly into going to fund a startup called Immunology, or Iman. It actually means gateway or portal. So there's a fun story about when I met the other co-founder of Portalarian, which is Richard Garriott's, the creator of the Ultima series company. But that's another thing we can talk about later. And I'm also the dad of 2 veggie kids. That's my family and my source of inspirations and joy in life. So basically, both my wife and I are vegetarians. We met at a vegetarian restaurant actually. And so these 2 kids, they were vegetarians since birth. Okay. And so this is, yeah, also something, if you're interested, we can find out a time to talk about. Okay, so the idea of my research direction has always been on how to build these really large-scale virtual worlds. And the founding of the company is also behind that, for that purpose. to be able to translate research results into technology or product service that can realize this. Okay, so let's start with something you're all familiar with, I think, which is Moore's Law. This is actually, we got this from a Wikipedia. It's extrapolations of Moore's Law of 120 years. Okay, so if you can have a closer look, it actually dates all the way back to 1900. And so when the first calculator were being introduced, and all the way until present. So this is really amazing and impressive that somehow our ability to compute our ability actually has been growing on an exponential curve. Okay, so despite various predictions in the past, Intel's, I think, CEO has mentioned this, that in his career of many years there had been numerous predictions of its end, but so far it's still going. Okay, and possibly it'll still continue for some time. So what this means is that there are going to be some application areas which previously were unthinkable or very difficult to do will become very feasible. One of them is AI. Okay, as many of you know, it's right now we have very good speech recognition, and AI has already beaten many of the chess masters of the world, even the most complex chess game like Go. I think the human champion was defeated by AI a few years ago. So AI will probably be able to address many of our, understand what we're talking about, and will be able to respond to our some needs in terms of information processing, information query. Okay, so AI is very good at that. And also like things like autonomous driving. And there's another trend that's going to happen as a result of this is that robotics. Of course, this deals not just for information processing, but also like mechanics, which is not something I'm familiar. But I do know that the fields of robotics combined with AI are going to be getting us, many tasks that's mundane, that's labor intensive, are going to be, replaced by robots. And so this already has happened in manufacture, some sectors of manufacturing. Okay, like Toyota, I think they make cars with mostly robotics arms. And like you see in this picture, at some point of time, not just like cleaning, but also maybe like a basic cashier's task, convenience stores, or like restaurants. Robots will probably be able to do a lot of the previously labor-intensive work that's done by human. And many people, for example, like Elon Musk, the founder of Tesla, SpaceX, and PayPal, he mentioned just recently in a World Economic Forum that the quote, okay, there will be fewer and fewer jobs that a robot cannot do better, unquote. Okay, so Elon, I think he mentioned some point that all of the Tesla that's been going out of factory are now pretty much autonomous driving capable. Okay, so the capability is there. It's just the software that might need some update. But once the software has been changed, basically all the currently shipping Teslas will be able to drive autonomously. And to think of this, put this in perspective, if autonomous vehicles becomes predominant, then what happens is a lot of what's called the driver's job will probably no longer exist. Okay, because autonomous driving will probably be cheaper and safer, and fewer accident, fewer less insurance. So I mean, why wouldn't we all want a driver, right, to drive us? Nobody really wants to. I mean, except for maybe some pleasure. But if you're not into driving, just trying to get from place A to place B, then autonomous driving will just be like taxi that's on demand. So technologies are getting there, and we'll probably be getting better at this. So this brings us to a question which the co-founder and I think CTO of Sun Microsystem, Bill Joy, has asked and answered a bit many years ago in a Wired article called "Why the Future Doesn't Need Us." So the idea that Bill Joy talked about is that as AI advances, at some point, the density of the transistors will be equivalent or surpass that of the human brain. So it's at least theoretically possible that at some point of time, the machines that we've made, the computers, will become smarter than us, okay, in terms of being intelligent. And he thinks and he predicts that there will be a time called the singularity, which he coined, that AI will be smarter than human beings. And what this mean indicated that because machines are able to also replicate a lot quicker than us. We have to, after pregnant, it's 9 months of pregnancy to give a new baby. And we humans, we talk, we communicate, we text messaging or like talking is probably the fastest, but talking is through the air, right? It's not as bandwidth intense as if you can talk over electrons like the computers can. So once computers might have even equivalent intelligence to human beings, they are able to communicate, replicate themselves much faster than we can. And so the amount of knowledge, experience, accumulation will be extraordinary, something faster and larger scale than what we can imagine. Okay, so at that point, maybe computers will take over robotics. They don't need us anymore. Okay, we humans, by comparison, are just like squirrels. Right now we see squirrels as something not as intelligent as us. That might be how the machines, the computers will see us at some point. That's the basic warning that Bill Joy has given us. Okay, so there are of course there are some bad scenarios that we're all familiar. The Terminator scenario, which is that human beings will become, prisoners of these machines physically in the physical world. And then there's also the mental prisoner scenario in the film Matrix, where the humanity has all plugged into a big, large simulator, okay, that's controlled by machines. And we're just, for their purpose, we're just like pets. Okay, so these are some of the bad scenarios that could happen as technology are progressing. But if we don't look at it so science fiction like, okay, because we still don't know if that's really going to happen. There are some actual real I think trends that's occurring in the real societies now that's worth paying attention to. Okay, so what we do know is that the middle class, I think this is data from maybe the US. Okay, it's basically showing the percentage of, if you look at the total amount of wealth in the society and how they are being distributed. The percentage share, the ratio of different class, lower, middle, upper, has been changed. Lower has been growing a bit down, but the middle class has decreased, and the upper class, those with better wealth, are increasing. And then there's another figure we can understand this from another way. This is showing the growth of the average household income in the US. Okay, so you can see that from 1979 to 2007. Okay, over the span of maybe 40 years. What happens is that the top 1% of households' income has grow. Okay, if you look at the right, has grown about 120%, but the income of the lower class actually has decreased negative 30%. Okay, so what we also see in the society is that greater wealth inequality is happening. And this is actually something not that difficult to understand because as we're talking about, as technology progress, a lot of the jobs that we know today are going to be replaced by more efficient automation and robotics. What this means is that the people or the companies who own these tools, AIs or robotics, they are in a position of generating more wealth with less people. Okay, so of course they will make wealth, right? And this wealth will be accumulated to the people who own these things. And for the many others who are being replaced, of course their economic status, their job securities um, will be lessened. Okay, so I think this is a trend that has been happening and appears to be, going on a greater scale as these technologies are being adopted. So for the future, I think what's going to happen, a lot of trends are pointing to this, is that a lot of the labor intensive, the mundane, the manual work will going to be replaced, and so there's no longer a demand for human to do that. Okay, productivities are going to be increasing, but at the same time, we're actually going to be needing less human beings to perform these tasks. So that brings us, the end of jobs as we currently know them. Even a lot of the professional jobs, like medical doctors, lawyers, accountants, although they are also knowledge-based, but if they involve more or less, memory and maybe some of the experience processing, sharing kind of jobs, then there's a good chance that AI can also, perform or replace those tasks. So what I'm seeing and expecting is a lot of the current jobs are going to be disappearing. Okay, as AI, robotics, and other things are, getting more advanced. But this also brings us to what are the other, jobs left. So actually, the jobs left are going to be more suitable for human brains, okay, and to our human potentials, things like imagination, negotiation, storytelling, design, creativity. So this might be a good news for, us researchers, okay, scientists, artists, people doing this work. But for a lot of the other people, it's maybe not so much a good news. And we know that from history, if you have people in a society that's poor, that's marginalized, that's not getting a good enough share of the wealth of the society, and they cannot get a good living, not even a basic living, people are going to get upset, and that could cause social unrest and even revolutions. So you're all now in Taiwan. Okay, I don't know how many of you know the history of Taiwan, but just briefly, what happened was, they're in the 40s, last century, 30s, 40s, after the Second World War. There has been great tension within China between, communism and the KMT party, So the rise of communism in China actually is largely due to there were a lot of poor people, okay, that are not able to get a living. So they basically supported the rising Communist Party, and which caused, this great conflict and great civil war. Many millions of lives were lost, and also the retreat of the KMT party to Taiwan, okay, which was, a sad historic event. If you look at the loss of human lives and the loss of the conflicts that's caused. So we don't want this to happen again, right? If you're in our right mind, and certainly a lot of these conflicts have happened in other parts of the world as well. So, what's the solution? Okay, there are some people I think a lot of economists, philosophers, mostly in the European areas, have pondered upon this question. And one of the solutions that's been now popping up, and I think gaining more attention, is what's called the Universal Basic Income, or simply Basic Income, or UBI. Okay, so the idea of basic income is very simple. It's the idea that the government should give every citizen an equal share of some kind of income that's enough to sustain their basic living, okay, or their substance. And the idea is that your basic living security is being protected by this basic income. So you don't have to work, but you can still have a good enough living, okay, a basic living standard. You don't have to live in poverty, basically. And this is unconditional, regardless of race, sex, religion, or your income level. Okay, so even the rich people will get this. And the reason behind this is that if you actually have a system like the current welfare system, if it's based on what's called a need base, you need an administration simply to define and to determine and to check who are eligible, who are not, and you're going to employ a lot of the government employees simply to dispatch the income to those who are in need. Okay, but with basic income, actually there is no such administrative overhead. Okay, so the idea is actually to provide I think it's based on the assumption that the wealth of the society is increasing, okay, and is enough to make all of us to have a good basic living condition. And so this should be given as a citizen's rights, just like education, just like voting. And if so, then at least there wouldn't be people below the poverty line, okay? And society as a whole is actually able to afford this, okay, because there's enough wealth if you really look at it. Okay, and there's also another good side, is that a lot of the traditionally not economic jobs, for example, mothers. Okay, mothers are very important to sustain the social fabrics of our society, but they're a non-paying job. Okay, nobody pays mother anymore. It's not you don't earn a wage by being a mother. Okay, but so what happens, I think, also in Taiwan as well. When I grew up, a lot of my peers, actually myself as well, we go home without seeing our mother because they're at work. Okay, and so a lot of these kids basically become what's called the TV children, or the keyring children, as we call them in Taiwan. They have their keys of their household. After school, they go home by themselves, start to watch TV, or some of them maybe have to buy their own dinner, by themselves, eat by themselves, without their parents being present, because they're all busy working outside. This is probably not a good way to grow up, without the accompanying of adults of your parents. So a lot of social problems can occur, and in fact, it's happening, I think, now in many of the modern societies, that due to parents not paying enough attention to their children. Yeah, so So it's probably a good thing. So if with basic income, basically, if you're a mother and you do have a basic standard living that you can have, you don't have to, you're not forced to get a job, okay, if you want to care more for your children. And same for some of the, low paying jobs, low wage jobs. If you have basic income, then these workers can simply say no to these jobs. Okay, they don't have to accept bad work conditions or very low pay simply to get a basic living. Okay, this will force employers to also raise up their salaries, okay, or improve their work conditions in order to attract workers to work for them. Okay, so there are some of these effects of having a basic income. All right, and from the academic circle, I think we're all familiar with this concept because basic income is it's already here. It's been provided to tenured professors, right? So I think many of you at the scene are professors on tenure. So with a tenure, basically you are protected from having to worry about your food, your mortgage, your house, right? So you gain freedom. Okay, with this protection, you have the freedom to do research, to explore, to do something experimental, adventurous, something creative, something that has the chance to fail. And that's usually how innovation comes. But of course, some teachers, I think some professors, they stop really working as hard or producing as good as well as previously. Okay, that's something that's going to happen as well. Okay, some people, maybe they are more interested in other pursuits in life, not in research. Once they got tenure, they might start to explore their other habits and interests, hobbies and interests. But I think overall, the tenure system does provide the protection and the basis for innovations and scientific research being done in a positive way. So overall, this is still a good system. So if we can apply this to society, I think one of the effects is that a lot of the more creative works, artistic works, will come up as a result. And this is not just shared by a few people. Many people actually have agreed. Many thought leaders, like Martin Luther King, many years ago, 1967, he said that he's convinced that the solution to poverty is to provide what's called a guaranteed income, which is the basic income, okay, universal basic income. And also there's many thought leaders, like Tim Berners-Lee, the inventor of World Wide Web, Mark Zuckerberg, founder of Facebook. He recently gave a speech at Harvard's graduation. I think this year, I encourage you to have a look. He talked about the importance to allow the young generation to innovate and fail, to try and fail, the freedom to fail, and how you can actually have that freedom, okay, when you're young and when you're not as resourceful as some of the elders. Basic income is probably something that will protect you for. Founder of eBay, Tim Draper, who is a well-known VC, Sam Altman, also of Y Combinator, Elon Musk, Nobel laureate, Archbishop Tutu, he's from South Africa. Also a very good friend of Dalai Lama, okay, and also like India's chief economic advisor. So many of these people, both in technology and elsewhere, I think they have seen the change in society and recognized the importance of a basic protection, economic protection to people's welfare or livelihood. Okay, but of course the question is, even though we might understand basic income could be a positive potential solution to this expected problem that we're probably be seen in the future. But where will this money come from? Okay, how will it come from? So this, of course, I think most people would think immediately that, of course, this will have to come from taxpayer money, right? So I think this is also how most basic income solutions are being proposed. Of course, the money has to come from somewhere, and there are richer peoples in the society, so it's probably going to be more tax for them in order to contribute to the to this system. But then, of course, this is something not that common, and so maybe this is going to be met with a lot of resistance. Okay, so I actually don't think we will get basic, and even though I'm also a supporter of the system, but I don't think that we will be getting it anytime soon from our real-world governments. Okay, and it's probably going to be going through many of the debates, arguments, and how things work in a democratic society, right? A lot of the discussion and arguments, and usually it's after a long period of time until something actually happens. So I'm going to be presenting a different angle from which is basically what the main theme of this talk is about. There's another trend besides AI and robotics that we know is coming, which is virtual reality. Okay, VR. And the implication, many people called last year the eve of VR, consumer VR, because many of the major headsets, Oculus, HTC Vive, Samsung's, okay, they all have offered these VR headsets in the consumer space, and that's affordable. That's finally giving us a good immersive feel that we can use. So with time, technology, as in the past, will get better and cheaper. Okay, that's the basic trend of technologies. So probably not soon later, we will have these photorealistics, by wearing a glass, you will be able to see, this room that you're in, all the people around you as real as what we see in the physical world. Okay, and be able to have remote interactions with them. This is something we know will also likely to occur with the advance of computing and technology. And and all these technologies are also like what's called a procedural content generation. I think they will also allow these really large scale and beautiful worlds, landscapes being generated. Okay. So we are expecting to have really large virtual worlds, which was also the original idea for MMVE, the workshop. And what happens is in these virtual worlds, right now most of them are games for entertainment purpose. But because we know there are examples like Second Life, it's actually feasible to build economy systems within these worlds. Okay, so we can, it's not hard to imagine once these VR headsets become as affordable, as realistic as, as what we can experience in the real world, then people will start to do all kinds of things inside them, not just for games or entertainment, but, things like attending class, okay, or doing remote conferencing for work, for business, or to socialize, or to build things, build architectures, clothes, as people are done in Second Life. So these kind of things already happen in online games or in Second Life, these virtual or digital economy, and because so there are, as long as you have human activities, you have supply and demand, there's going to be economy systems in them. So if we expect these virtual worlds to grow bigger and better and more pervasive and more diverse, there's probably going to be a economy systems develop that's growing. And this economy system has the potential to outgrow, the physical world. The reason is that, we do have a limited amount of physical resource, even though it's a lot, but there's a limit to that. We have a limited Earth, basically. So, if we continue to grow our economy using physical materials, it's not really sustainable in the long run. At some point, there will hit a limit. Okay, and we already know from a lot of places that our globe, our Earth, it may already not be sustainable with our current consumption patterns and how we're using these physical resources. So a sensible way, and I think something that's probably will be a good thing to happen, is the economy activities of us, of human beings, will happen largely within these digital virtual worlds. Okay, so there are some benefits to this. For example, that you will be able to attend class, or because these architectures or things close avatars, they can be built and created much faster and cheaper than you do in the physical world. So essentially the economies can become bigger without too much physical consumption or pollutions or wastes in the real world. So that's another aspect to think about this digital economy. So let's assume that these virtual worlds will also happen alongside with AI and robotics. Okay, and there will be virtual economies growing inside these virtual worlds. So going back to the question of how are we going to fund the basic income system. So to get money, we should probably seek wisdom from the richest man, right? So one of the richest, and I think also a very wise man, is Warren Buffett. Many of you know him. He's a very good, maybe one of the best stock pickers of investments. But when it comes to investment advice, his first advice is actually to most of us, don't invest, okay, like him, because we would probably fail. We would probably not find what are the right stocks. It takes a lot of time and interest to investigate them. But one thing he does recommend is something that's very easy and simple to generate wealth, is what's called the index fund. Okay, so the index fund is actually something that's picking stock based on the index, the stock system index. Okay, so the stock system is made of many stocks from many different companies, and some of the good ones are picked and form an index, and that's usually how we get the star market, the number. And so index fund basically invests across, regardless, there's no discerning, and all over all the companies on the index. So what this means is that index fund will actually grow as the economy grow, as the stock market grow. And this is a very simple way, because you don't have to investigate, you don't have to study how to invest, but you can still gain from the wealth that's generated if society is continuing progressing and economy is growing. So the power of index fund is that even though it's an unattended fund, okay, in the sense that you don't have to have active efforts to investigate which stock to invest or pick, but it actually performs better than most of the active funds. So if you look at this, if the blue is the market, the orange part is the index fund. It's actually performing better than other mutual fund and high fee mutual fund over many years. Okay. So my proposal in this talk, the main proposal here is that we should fund basic income from the economies within these virtual worlds. Okay, so so virtual worlds, of course, they can have tax. Okay, and getting tax from the economic activities within virtual worlds is much easier because everything is digitalized. All things are logged. Okay, so you're not able to escape any tax. So it'd be easy to get the tax. And also, if you have the tax and form an index fund, of course, there's another assumption here that's to be made is that, as these, as these as economies in the virtual worlds are getting larger, so well, companies being formed, and maybe there will be stocks as well that can be invested. So an index fund or sort of or similar things systems that's set up attached to the economy of virtual worlds will actually be able to provide and generate a steady stream of wealth. Okay, and as long as this digitalized economy, virtual economy, can be linked back to the economy of the real world, which Second Life already does that. So we know that it's possible and feasible, and we already have digital currencies like bitcoins. So if you imagine there's a virtual world that's purely based on bitcoins or equivalents, then it's exchangeable with physical money like the US dollar, like the new Taiwan dollar you're using while you're in Taiwan. So what this means is that if we can build a fund for the virtual world, then we are probably able to we can build a system that dispatch basic income to all the citizens, okay, of a particular virtual world. And if they can exchange that back to real world money or the physical world money, they can have a basic, living from that. That can buy them food, clothes, house, or rent, and provide them with a basic substance. And this is something that probably I'm imagining that it might be easier to realize than having basic income in the real world from governments. Okay, because this is something that's feasible as when these virtual worlds are getting more numerous and also have economic activities within them. And there's a bonus to this as well. The bonus item is, okay, if this virtual world or maybe many of these virtual worlds, its ownership is public, like the internet, and distributed governed, meaning that no single government or entity or corporation can control it, then it will probably be even more universal and can more be tuned to public interests instead of corporate interests. So this is something, of course, involve architectural design. So that's the expertise of many of you here. Of course, we do know there are concerns, okay, of these virtual worlds. We can already see from the examples of video games that there's concerns over violence and violent activities that's due to video games. And although we as researchers or who are working in the related fields of these virtual worlds or games may not like to admit, but I do feel that and think that there are some implications and links between having accustomed to been playing these very violent acts versus how your mind and how your attitude will shape towards other people, other human beings. So having a virtual world that's large and engaging, actually there's a very negative potential to this. One of them is people become um, less caring and less about each other, okay, and are more just in tune with the virtual stuff. And there's also physical, social inhibition. You withdraw from the real society and, alone in the room and hook all day, playing and doing things in the virtual world without getting any, sunshine, air, grass. So there is also a very negative potential downside to having really large-scale virtual environments like this. It can be addictive, and it can be withdrawing. So I think the challenge for us is how can we actually build a different, maybe a world of goodwill or good health, okay, a good world, so to speak. Not just, I mean, no offense, but we already have World of Warcraft, right? But we don't yet, I think, have a world of goodwill. Okay, so that's something interesting to think about. Can we build actually a world of goodwill that's helpful for people's being, their sense of purpose, that they can find something meaningful to do inside, and the economies in the world can actually be the basis for a basic income system that eliminates poverty and provides a basic living standards for all its citizens or people who are participating. There are these good potentials for this. I'm not going to go into detail, but I encourage you to have a look. This game designer Jane, he has given a TED talk called "Gaming Can Make a Better World." His arguments are mainly that games are very engaging. Okay, with properly designed games, the players are very creative, very engaged to the game's mission and task. Gamers are actually the best problem solvers, and a lot of the times to accomplish a task they need to collaborate. So she argues the task for us is how we can turn real-world problems into games or make them game-like and have the world's game players to solve them. Okay, so by playing the game, they will also be solving all these social problems or other problems in society. So that's one aspect we can look at. The other is this author, researcher, James Paul G. As you can see, he's of an older age, which most people in his age or generation don't really play video games. But purely out of curiosity, he wanted to find out why are these young kids so interested, so engaged in these activities. So he actually went into playing them and learned how to play. What he found surprised him. He found that games or these virtual worlds are the best way to learn. Okay, because games have to design in an incremental step-by-step way so that players don't get discouraged by the difficult task. If they do, then they wouldn't play the game and the developers wouldn't make any money. Okay, so basically this is how the angle he's cutting at. And so he wrote this book about what video games can teach us about learning and literacy. Okay, so so he's basically saying these games, or by extension virtual worlds, they actually are the best learning device. So it's really a matter of what are the things we are going to be teaching, okay, people, the content basically. The mechanisms itself are great learning vehicles. Gamers learn a lot. Okay, developers are teaching them, in the best, almost like the best teacher that's out there. Okay, and so the really key question I think is content. Okay, the content of these virtual worlds or these, what are you going to be able to do inside these virtual worlds? What are the content? What are the goals? What are the missions? And I'm borrowing and this from so in seeking answers to this, I think we can look from some other areas, some other fields. So this gentleman here, Ekinori Kumura, he's actually there's a touching story. He's actually an organic apple farmer. So he lives in the province in Japan that produces apples. Okay, that's famous for apples. But they all use pesticides and chemical fertilizers. And because his wife is allergic to these things, so even though their family has an apple farm, but by working inside the farms, their health actually gets deteriorated with time. So he set up the goal to, how we can actually grow an apple without chemical fertilizers, without these pesticides that's, harmful for human health. And he had a great journey and very difficult journey on this. Okay, so he basically, wasn't getting any result for the first 3-4 years. He was broke, he was even beaten, lost his teeth when he was working in pachinko, to get some money to go on with living. He didn't really get anything until I think the 7th or the 8th year, when he finally understood the key was in the earth, in the soil of the earth. Not anything, that's visible, like getting rid of the worms and the pests, but actually to make the earth, the soil, healthy and rich. And then you will have good apple trees. So his story is something, So we know organic farmings, right? And even though at the first stage it could be difficult, once you find the actual methodologies, you can actually, produce very healthy, very good, food for people to live, to eat without the downsides. So another example is here in Taiwan. This is Li-Zhen, okay, which is one of I think one of the largest organic chain stores in Taiwan, and their values were based on integrity, collaboration and gratitude. Okay, so it's actually a system. Li-Zhen was it was founded by a Buddhist monk. Okay, 日常法师. So about like over 20 years ago, when none of this was popular, he wanted to find a system where people can actually, buy organic food and without the harmful pesticides. And so they understood that the key thing is about the consumers. You have to have supporters to buy these goods. So they actually built this distribution system where they educate the consumers on the benefits of organic goods, and they buy them from the farmers, guaranteed buying from the farmers, regardless of whether it's good looking or they have good volume. They just pay them with enough. Actually, this is like a basic income system. Okay, so they provide guaranteed income for the farmers, so they are able to experiment and to fail and to find the ways to actually properly grow organic goods until it's good enough, for the mass markets. And this has to be supported by an educated group of consumers. So there's and right now Li-Zhen has over I think 120 stores all around Taiwan. You're also welcome to go into one and to take a look, while you're here. So this is another example that I've learned that that actually has been successful in turning out organic goods. So I think the idea here, going back, is if right now most of the content in the virtual worlds, I think they're driven by the goal is to make money, right, for for the company. And the means are violence, sex, sex symbols, and also like other things that's stimulating, But can there be a different virtual world that's based on a different purpose. For example, to be able to provide basic income to those in need, right? And the means could be things that's more, story-driven, educational, and that's done in a good way to encourage collaborations, cooperations, understanding, empathy, things like that. Okay, and so it's kind of like an organic version of the virtual worlds we're familiar with. Okay, so my my suggestion and my challenge is to you is to think of it whether this is something that's possible. Okay, that's something actually we can build. And there's also this guy Peter Diamandis. I think he wrote a book called Abundance. He's basically the chair of the X Prize Foundation, which awarded the X Prize. The first they hold this contest and challenge people to build spacecrafts to go into the orbit that's cheap and affordable. So he actually wrote in his book that very detailed and very convincingly that with technology there is a bright future ahead of us, which is energy, clean water, education will become abundant. This is in fact what's happening now with all the technologies developments. But I guess the question is, with the abundance of these things, resource, are we able to build a fair society where all the people in the society can benefit from this? Okay, and there is I think, a good story on this. There is hope on this. Cambodia, much like I think Taiwan, China, there used to be a communist. There's a communist government that actually has killed a lot of the intellectuals in the few decades ago. So there's this really gap of teachers and educators in Cambodia. So this is actually a recent story on how things could turn in a positive way. How these goodwill content can form, or how these good things can happen. My friend, he's actually pictured in the right, top right. He used to work at General Electric as the CIO of in Asia regions and retired a few years ago. And he went to Cambodia, saw the problems, education problems there, and wanted to build a program to help these young people to be educated for the modern society. Learn on English, Chinese, on the business, and wish to help them to go into college. Okay. And his approach, because he's small, he's with a single person, not much resource in terms of money. The way he does this actually very, very interesting. He calls upon his old colleagues around the world to provide remote tutoring in English, in in other aspects to these children in Cambodia. Okay, so they live in this building, but they get their classes from different teachers around the world. Okay, so I think there is already examples, even though this is not done in a virtual world yet. But this shows the potential promise of virtual worlds as a place to allow remote learning and remote collaborations. Because this is an example where the resource, the wealth in one end of the continent can actually be helpful to the other end with proper technology. So with that, I think my challenge to all of you is how we can actually build a loving earth, a world of goodwill, solve the poverty and education problem via a good world. Okay, so I think this will be a better version we would like to have, even if technologies take over our jobs, take over many of our jobs. The idea is that I think we will still be able to do meaningful things in a different, virtual space, in the virtual worlds, and even have the economic activities in the virtual worlds be able to sustain people's welfare and livelihood in the physical world. And by that, these two worlds will, I think, merge into one good world that all of us will want to live in. So with that, I conclude my talk, and thank you very much for your attention. And if you have any questions, feel free to drop me an email. I'd be happy to discuss. Okay, thank you very much.